What if I told you that a quiet, poor boy walked onto one of the biggest stages in the world, and just a few minutes later, even the toughest judge in the room was left speechless? Before we begin, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel, because stories like this prove that sometimes the smallest voices carry the biggest dreams. The lights inside the America's Got Talent theater glowed brightly as the audience chatted excitedly, waiting for the next contestant. Backstage, however, a thin 12-year-old boy stood nervously near the curtain. His name was Miguel Santos, a young boy from a small fishing village in the Philippines. His clothes were simple: a slightly oversized white shirt, worn jeans, and old sneakers that looked like they had seen many rainy days. In his hands he held a second-hand acoustic guitar, its wood scratched and faded from years of use. Miguel looked out from behind the curtain, staring at the massive crowd. Thousands of people. Bright lights. Huge cameras. His heart pounded in his chest. Just a year ago, he had never even imagined leaving his village, let alone standing on a stage like this. Back home, Miguel's life had never been easy. His father was a fisherman who spent long nights at sea, often returning with barely enough fish to feed the family. His mother worked at a small roadside stall selling rice and vegetables. Some days they earned enough money for dinner. Some days they didn't. But despite their struggles, Miguel always had one thing that made him smile: music. Near their small wooden house, there was an old radio that barely worked. It crackled with static most of the time, but occasionally it caught foreign stations playing songs from far away. One evening, when Miguel was about 8 years old, a song played through the static that would change his life forever. On a dark desert highway, cool wind in my hair. Miguel didn't understand all the words, but the melody fascinated him. The guitar sounded magical. The song was Hotel California. He listened to it over and over again whenever the radio managed to catch the signal. Soon Miguel began trying to copy the melody. At first he used an old broomstick, pretending it was a guitar. Then one day his father found a broken acoustic guitar in a fishing market. The strings were rusty and 2 tuning pegs were missing, but Miguel's father brought it home anyway. It became Miguel's greatest treasure. Every evening after school, Miguel sat outside their house and practiced. His fingers hurt. Sometimes they bled. But he kept playing. The neighbors often stopped to listen. Slowly, his music started spreading through the small village. One afternoon, a tourist visiting the village heard Miguel playing and recorded a short video on his phone. The tourist uploaded it online, not thinking much about it. Within days, the video spread across social media. People were amazed. A poor young boy sitting barefoot outside a wooden hut, playing Hotel California with incredible passion and skill. The video reached thousands, then millions. Eventually, someone from America's Got Talent saw the clip. And that's how Miguel Santos, a boy who had never even been on an airplane, suddenly found himself traveling across the world to audition on one of the biggest talent shows in the world. Back on the AGT stage, the host smiled warmly as Miguel walked out with his guitar. The audience applauded politely, but many people seemed unsure. He looked so small standing on that giant stage. One of the judges leaned forward. Simon Cowell raised an eyebrow slightly. "So, what's your name?" Simon asked. Miguel held the microphone nervously. "My name is Miguel Santos. I'm from the Philippines." The audience clapped again. "And how old are you?" Simon asked. "I'm 12 years old, sir." Simon nodded. "And what will you be performing for us today?" Miguel swallowed hard. "I will sing and play Hotel California." The audience murmured with surprise. It was a bold choice. A legendary song. One that even professional singers struggled to perform well. Simon leaned back in his chair, slightly skeptical. "All right, Miguel. Let's hear it." Miguel took a deep breath. For a moment, the entire theater went silent. Then he began to play. The first notes of the guitar echoed through the room. Clear. Smooth. Perfect. Some people in the audience looked at each other in surprise. Then Miguel started singing. On a dark desert highway, cool wind in my hair. His voice was soft but powerful, filled with emotion far beyond his years. The room froze. The judges slowly leaned forward. The audience watched in stunned silence. Miguel closed his eyes as he sang, pouring his heart into every word. It wasn't just a performance. It was a story of struggle, hope, and dreams. Halfway through the song, the audience began clapping along. By the time he reached the famous chorus, people were already on their feet. The crowd erupted into cheers. Even Simon Cowell, known for being one of the toughest judges in the world, looked completely shocked. When Miguel finished the final note, the entire theater exploded with applause. Thousands of people stood up, cheering loudly. The judges were standing too. Miguel looked around in disbelief, tears forming in his eyes. Simon slowly leaned toward his microphone. Miguel. I have heard this song performed hundreds of times, he said. But I have never heard it performed like that by someone your age. The audience cheered again. Another judge wiped away tears. Simon continued, your voice, your guitar playing, and your story. It's incredible. Miguel tried to speak but couldn't. He was too emotional. Then suddenly, one of the judges smiled and reached toward the golden button. You know what, the judge said. I think the world needs to hear more of you. Slam. The golden buzzer exploded with golden confetti raining down across the stage. The audience screamed with excitement. Miguel covered his face in shock as golden confetti fell around him. He had done it. A poor boy from a tiny fishing village had just stunned the world. Backstage, Miguel's parents watched the moment on a screen, crying tears of pride. The cameras captured Miguel standing on the stage, smiling through tears, holding his old guitar tightly. At that moment, he wasn't just a contestant anymore. He was an inspiration. Because sometimes the most powerful voices come from the most unexpected places. A boy with a broken guitar. A dream bigger than his circumstances. And a song that changed everything. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel for more incredible and inspiring stories like this. Because the next dreamer could be someone just like Miguel. What if I told you that a shy, poor boy from a small fishing village walked onto one of the biggest stages in the world, and just a few minutes later, the entire audience was on their feet while one of the toughest judges in the world sat completely stunned? Stay with me until the end of this story because it will remind you that dreams can rise from the most unexpected places. And before we begin, if you enjoy inspiring stories like this, don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another incredible moment. Far away from the bright lights of big cities, in a quiet coastal village in the Philippines, lived a boy named Miguel Santos. The village was small, surrounded by the sea on one side and thick green trees on the other. Most families there lived simple lives. They worked hard every day just to earn enough money to survive. Miguel's family was no different. Their home was a small wooden house built on stilts near the edge of the water. When the wind blew hard at night, the walls creaked and the roof rattled. But inside that house lived a family full of love. Miguel was 12 years old, thin and quiet, with messy black hair and deep brown eyes that always seemed to carry a dream. His father, Ramon, was a fisherman who left home before sunrise every morning. Sometimes he returned with baskets full of fish. Other times he came back almost empty-handed. His mother, Elena, sold simple meals at a roadside stall. She woke up before dawn to cook rice and vegetables that she hoped travelers might buy. Money was always tight. Some nights the family shared one small meal and tried to pretend they were not still hungry. But despite the struggles, Miguel had something that made him feel rich. Music. Near their house was an old radio that his father had repaired many times. The radio was old and rusty, and most of the time it only made crackling noises. But every once in a while, if Miguel adjusted the antenna just right, it would catch songs from distant stations. One evening, when Miguel was about 8 years old, he heard a song that would change his life. The radio crackled. Then suddenly a guitar melody floated through the air. On a dark desert highway, cool wind in my hair. Miguel didn't understand all the English words, but something about the song captured his heart immediately. The guitar sounded magical. The melody felt mysterious and beautiful. It was the famous song Hotel California. From that day on, Miguel listened to the song whenever the radio managed to find the signal. He memorized every note, every pause, every emotion. But there was one problem. Miguel didn't have a guitar. For weeks he pretended to play using a broomstick. He sat outside the house, closing his eyes and imagining the music. His father watched this quietly. One afternoon while working near the fish market, Ramon noticed an old broken guitar leaning against a wall. The wood was scratched, 2 strings were missing, and the neck looked slightly bent. Most people would have considered it trash. But Ramon picked it up. He brought it home and handed it to Miguel. Miguel's eyes widened like he had just been given the greatest treasure in the world. "Thank you. What if I told you that a shy, poor boy from a tiny fishing village walked onto one of the biggest stages in the world, and just a few minutes later the entire audience was standing, cheering, while one of the toughest judges in television history sat there completely stunned?" This is a story about hope, courage, and a dream that refused to stay small. So stay with me until the end because this moment will remind you that sometimes the greatest voices come from the quietest places. And before we begin, if you love inspiring stories like this, make sure you like this video and subscribe to the channel so you never miss another incredible story. Far away from the bright lights of big cities, in a peaceful coastal village in the Philippines, lived a young boy named Miguel Santos. The village was small and simple. Wooden houses stood close together near the shore, and fishing boats lined the beach every morning. Life there was quiet but difficult. Most families survived by fishing or selling small goods in local markets. Money was always limited, and every day was a struggle to earn enough to eat. Miguel lived in a small wooden house with his parents and younger sister. The house stood on thin wooden stilts near the water. During strong winds, the walls creaked and the roof rattled loudly, but inside the tiny home was a family full of love. Miguel's father, Ramon, was a fisherman who worked long hours at sea. Before sunrise every morning, Ramon pushed his old wooden boat into the water and sailed out into the dark ocean hoping to catch enough fish to sell. Some days were good, but many days were disappointing. When the sea was rough or the fish were scarce, Ramon returned home tired and worried. Miguel's mother, Elena, worked just as hard. She ran a small food stall near the road leading into the village. She cooked rice, fried fish, and vegetables for travelers and villagers. Sometimes she sold enough food to earn a little money. Other times she barely sold anything. Despite the struggles, Miguel's parents always tried to keep their children hopeful. They believed that education and determination could change their future. Miguel was a quiet boy with messy black hair and thoughtful brown eyes. He wasn't the loudest child in the village. He didn't like fighting or showing off. Instead, he spent most of his time dreaming. And the thing he dreamed about the most was music. Near their small house sat an old radio that Ramon had repaired several times. The radio was rusty and unreliable. Most of the time it produced only static noises. But sometimes, if Miguel adjusted the antenna carefully, the radio would catch music from distant stations. One evening, when Miguel was 8 years old, he heard a song that would change everything. The radio crackled softly. Then suddenly a guitar melody floated through the air. The sound was mysterious and beautiful. Miguel sat down beside the radio and listened carefully. On a dark desert highway, cool wind in my hair. Miguel didn't fully understand the English lyrics, but he felt the emotion in the music. The guitar sounded magical, like it was telling a story. The song was Hotel California. From that day on, Miguel became obsessed with that song. Every time the radio managed to catch the station again, he listened closely and tried to memorize every note. But Miguel had one big problem. He didn't have a guitar. So he used a broomstick. He sat outside his house pretending the broomstick was a guitar. He moved his fingers across the imaginary strings and quietly sang the melody. His father noticed this many times. One afternoon Ramon returned from the fishing market and saw an old guitar leaning against a wooden wall. It looked broken and forgotten. The strings were rusty, the body scratched, and 2 tuning pegs were missing. Most people would have ignored it. But Ramon thought about his son. He picked up the guitar and brought it home. When Miguel saw it, his eyes grew wide with disbelief. "Papa, is this for me?" he asked softly. Ramon nodded and smiled. "It's not perfect," he said, "but maybe you can make it sing." Miguel held the guitar like it was the most valuable object in the world. From that moment, everything changed. Every day after school, Miguel sat outside his house practicing. At first the guitar sounded rough and out of tune. His fingers struggled to press the strings correctly. Sometimes his fingertips hurt so much he had to stop. But he never gave up. Weeks passed. Then months. Slowly, the music began to improve. Miguel practiced until sunset every evening. The sound of his guitar echoed through the small village streets. Neighbors started stopping by to listen. Children sat on the ground nearby. Fishermen returning from the sea paused to hear the young boy play. Soon everyone in the village knew about Miguel and his guitar. But Miguel never imagined that the world outside the village would hear him too. One afternoon, a tourist visiting the area heard Miguel playing outside his house. The man was surprised by the young boy's skill and emotion. He quietly recorded a short video on his phone while Miguel played Hotel California. When the song ended, the tourist smiled and said, "You're really talented." Later that evening, the tourist uploaded the video online. At first nothing happened. Then slowly people began sharing it. The video spread across social media. Thousands watched it. Then hundreds of thousands. Soon millions of people around the world were watching the young boy with the broken guitar. Comments filled the internet. "His voice is amazing. This boy deserves a big stage. Someone help him achieve his dream." Among the millions who saw the video were producers from one of the most famous talent shows in the world, America's Got Talent. They were amazed. Within days, they contacted Miguel's family. They invited him to audition. At first the family thought it was a joke. But it was real. Soon Miguel found himself preparing for the biggest journey of his life. He had never left the Philippines before. He had never been on an airplane. The day he stepped onto the plane with his parents, he looked out the window at the clouds and wondered if his dream was finally beginning. When they arrived in America, everything felt enormous. The buildings were taller, the streets busier, and the theaters brighter than anything Miguel had ever seen. Then the day of the audition arrived. Backstage at the AGT Theater, hundreds of contestants waited nervously for their turn. Some were singers. Some were dancers. Others were magicians or comedians. Miguel stood quietly in the corner holding his old guitar. He thought about his village. He thought about his parents working so hard every day. And he promised himself that he would give everything he had. Finally, someone called his name. "Miguel Santos, you're up next." His heart began pounding. The stage manager smiled and said, "Good luck." The curtain opened. Miguel walked onto the stage. Bright lights shined into his eyes. Thousands of people filled the audience seats. The judges sat at their table watching carefully. The audience clapped politely as the small boy stepped into the spotlight. Simon Cowell leaned forward slightly. "What's your name?" Simon asked. "My name is Miguel Santos," the boy replied. "And where are you from?" "I'm from the Philippines." The audience applauded warmly. "How old are you?" Simon asked. "I'm 12 years old." Simon nodded. "And what will you be performing for us today?" Miguel swallowed nervously. I will sing and play Hotel California." A wave of murmurs passed through the audience. It was a bold choice. Simon raised an eyebrow. "Well, let's hear it." Miguel closed his eyes. He placed his fingers on the guitar strings. The theater became completely silent. Then the first notes rang out. Clear. Smooth. Beautiful. The judges looked surprised. Then Miguel began to sing. On a dark desert highway, cool wind in my hair. His voice was soft but powerful. The emotion in his singing filled the entire theater. The audience leaned forward. Some people placed their hands over their mouths in surprise. As the song continued, Miguel's confidence grew stronger. His guitar playing became more powerful. His voice soared through the chorus. Soon the audience began clapping along. People started smiling. Some even stood up. Simon Cowell watched carefully, clearly impressed. By the time Miguel reached the final chorus, the entire audience was standing. When the last note echoed through the theater, there was a brief moment of silence. Then the crowd exploded. Thunderous applause filled the room. The judges stood up. Miguel looked around in shock. He had never seen so many people cheering for him. Simon leaned toward the microphone. "Miguel," he said slowly, "that was one of the most surprising auditions I've seen in a long time." The audience cheered again. "You have an incredible voice," Simon continued, "and your guitar playing is fantastic." Miguel's eyes filled with tears. Another judge smiled warmly. "You came all the way from the Philippines with a dream, and you just proved that dreams really can come true." Then she looked toward the golden buzzer. The audience gasped. "You know what," she said. "I think the world deserves to hear more of you." She slammed the golden buzzer. Golden confetti exploded into the air and rained down across the stage. The crowd screamed with excitement. Miguel covered his face in disbelief as the golden confetti fell around him. Backstage, his parents watched the moment on a screen and cried with happiness. Their son had just achieved something they never imagined possible. Miguel stood in the center of the stage holding his old guitar, surrounded by cheering fans and shining lights. At that moment he realized something powerful. Dreams do not belong only to the rich or the famous. Dreams belong to anyone brave enough to believe in them. A poor boy from a small